Welcome to the Love Pod, where inspiration, vision, and real connection come alive. Wherever you are, you belong here.
Welcome to the Love Pod, everyone. I am your host today, Nathaniel. I am so pleased to welcome a soul brother, I can tell just from meeting him, Simon Mont, who is a lawyer, a strategist, a facilitator, a mystic, and a problem solver devoted to humanity's highest good. Very cool, Simon. And in a decade since co-founding Harmonize Consulting, you've helped over 300 teams develop structures, cultures, practices, and strategies that need to make impact and have fun doing it. And that's so key. We talk a lot about world enlightenment. We like to call it heaven on Mother Earth, home. And I've been saying for a long time now, if it's not fun, we're not going to do it. So I'm really eager to have this conversation. Welcome to the Love Pod, and I'd like to just ask you to introduce yourself and share us more about what you do and why you do it.
Yeah, thanks, Nathaniel. It's great to be chatting with you. I'm looking forward to seeing where we go.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm right now I'm up in the mountains in Santa Fe, and I got my wife and my newborn kid are still luckily asleep, and hopefully we'll be able to get some good rest.
Okay.
And I've kind of traveled a lot in the United States, lived in a number of places. I was born in New York, then I went to Maryland, then Arkansas, then California, then Colorado. Then I traveled around. Oh, yeah, I traveled around in a van. I landed in Santa Fe,
Amazing.
then went to Durham. So, seen a pretty broad swath of this country, at least. And for the past, decade or so, I've just been devoted to this question of how do we work together
Mm,
in order to create the world that we all know that we and the planet and its inhabitants
mm,
deserve. How do we actually do it? And I think like it really came into focus when I was in law school,
mm,
and I wanted to do anti-mass incarceration, anti-school to prison pipeline work.
mm,
And then I saw like, oh, well, the systems we're using to make the change are actually replicating a lot of the dynamics
mm,
that we want to change. So I got
mm,
into like movement lawyering, community organizing. I saw the same thing. And I saw this puzzle that a lot of us who have the vision of the world that we want to see, whether that's a like large scale vision or just a particular vision for a product or a service or a community, a smaller community, we understand the problem, we understand the issue area, we have a vision, but then there's this puzzle of, well, how do we organize a bunch of people to
mm.
focus on that and get it done? And then that is this different skill set than having the vision. And then we had a lot of vision, but not a lot of capacity to pull it off. So I just became obsessed with the puzzle. And I've been doing that for a long time now.
I think that's super cool, man. You and I have a lot of parallels, and like I've been obsessed about the interconnection of all things in life. It's what led me to study Indigenous wellness and to just learn more about our relations and how these systems in nature operate so harmoniously and so
Mhm.
synergistically compared to a lot of the hierarchical models that we see in society. And I mean, with your background, I remember being a professor at a college and learning about, I was taking a course called Teaching Adult Lifelong Learners. And in the
Mhm.
course, they had the audacity to show us like the conveyor belt model of education and how it came from the industrial age. And that's why children are all in the same grade, from born from the same year to basically train them to be employees that are obedient. And they're showing us this video and then talking and then instructing us how to be better instructors of adult learners. And I'm like, so basically just we're part of this system, like, and you know it, and you're just like it's like, the things that are in our plain vision
Uh-huh.
are so interesting. So I'd love to know like that journey and where is it where you've come to now, like what's the cutting edge for Simon.
Which aspect of the journey? The like the how do we work together and
Yeah,
what
the
I've been learning?
synergizing. Yeah, like because in your bio, you talk like harmony to me is an interesting concept because like when I was learning from a lot of different indigenous cultures and and elders and things, this idea of democracy, rooted in some of the Six Nations and Haudenosaunee teachings, as well as this idea of it's beyond democracy. It's really when we have consensus, and this I feel like we have a lot of beliefs about what consensus is. But what I learned is that you can have divergent opinions in a community, but when the community decides from a majority, even the people who had, objections or whatever, they will go along with the wholeness and they agree to be part of the whole moving forward. And I thought that's a really interesting idea, and it leads to harmony. But harmony also is, there's harmonics in music. It's about resonance. It's about coherence. And we're in this really interesting time where science and some of those spiritual, deeper principles of interconnection are coming to guide us. So I'd love to know, yeah, more about that work and where you've come to.
Oh, that's fun. This is going to be fun because we can talk all about hierarchy and hierarchy and consensus. And
Yeah,
I'll defend some hierarchy and
sure.
problematize some consensus. It'll be fun. Um, so starting with just what I'm trying to refer to when I mean harmony.
Mm,
So if we look out at the world, we see a whole bunch of separate things, and they're all exchanging energy
mm,
with one another. I see the tree and it's exchanging energy with the
mm,
sun. And I see, and the bird is exchanging energy with the the nut that it eats or whatever. It's constant exchange. And we're united in that fabric of exchange. And there's like nourishment and toxin available
mhm,
inside of it. And when a thing gets nourishment, it becomes more of what it is and was already. And we can see it because it starts to provide more nourishment to the things around it. You
mm,
see a really healthy tree, it's providing tons of nourishment to everything around. Then and then there's this question of, well, where does nourishment itself arise from?
mm,
And in my lineage, there's a story, right? This is the plane that we see, this nourishment, and the entirety, this whole world with its entire fabric of exchange and all of its things is also receiving nourishment from somewhere else. It's receiving it from the beyond, let's call it.
mm,
So there's this big process occurring, which is basically the visible world that we're in is welcoming in nourishment and then exchanging all of this nourishment around. And that process has a will and a love and an impulse
mm,
itself.
mhm,
So harmony is being in harmony and resonance with that process that's going on.
mm,
That's the
mm,
game. That's like the game we're playing as humans.
mm, mm,
And there can be things that are in and out of that harmony.
mhm, mhm,
And there are things that can be inside that harmony that you have to notice how they're in it. Like compost, for example, right?
mm,
A decaying body
mm,
looks like death. It looks gross, but actually it's part of this harmonious cycle, right? In the same way that harmony in jazz, it's not clean harmonics
mm,
the entire time. There's
mhm,
dissonance and crunch that
mhm,
propels it forward. So we're talking about harmony. We're talking about the human body and the human being and the human community and the human process of creativity being
mhm,
in resonance with that whole thing, and that's the game. That's the
mhm.
game that we're playing.
I love that, man. And you remind me of the importance of having distinction between the infinite game and the
Mhm.
finite games that we play. And sometimes those finite games can take a hold of our identity patterns and create situations where, like we see this huge divides in, say, um, access to wealth or access to education or resources on the planet. And when, I heard years ago that the meaning of a jubilee is not to celebrate royalty. It's actually to return, kind of set the game back to zero so it doesn't get too unfair when people who know the rule, who know how to play the game really well, can really dominate other people. It just makes it go back to the fun part, right?
Yeah.
But something you said, one of my favorite quotes from the Christ letters, and there's a good chance you've never heard of the Christ letters before, because not a lot of people have in North America, which I
Uh-huh.
like to refer to as Turtle Island. But I talk a lot about them on the show, and I think they're really important. But he says that one of my favorite quotes in them is, "The purpose of existence is the mutual reciprocation of creation, or of the mutual reciprocation of communication between the creator and creation. And it talks about that flow in a different way that you're talking about. And I feel like I remember reading another book years ago, and it was called The Power of Receiving. And it was boiled down to this idea that there's only really two kinds of relationships. There's relationships where giving and receiving are in mutual reciprocity, and you know because when you're receiving, you feel grateful, and the person giving feels uplifted and giving. And then there's doing taking relationships where it's extractive, it's consumptive, and the person doing all the doing is enabling the taking, where they feel like a victim, like everyone's taken from me. But it leads to feelings of resentment. So it's like again back to this feeling of something being off. But yeah, I love how you talked about you need to have that subtlety of awareness to look at
Mhm.
those relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, what's who wrote the Christ letters? Tell me about the
Yeah.
lineage of that a little.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you some context. So, I'm born in a really secular family. Not very spiritual, I would say. We had our own I was my parents are from Quebec, but they moved to Alberta, and had me and my sister. So it always felt like this small little unit. And my mom has her background was French Catholic, and her grandmother, my mame, or her mother, my mame, like grew up in a convent. Like, and I feel like she had definitely experienced some abuse. I wonder if she was taken, like they say it was because of poverty, but a lot of children were kind of taken out of their homes. So, anyways, when I was a baby, my mom tried to have me baptized by her church, but they rejected me because my mom had been previously married when she was younger, with no children or anything. And so I grew up very outside of any kind of religious thing, but I was a very inspired little boy, always looking for truth and spending a lot of time in nature and contemplation. And and before I found the letters, about 10 years before, I was spent a lot of time in the nature, writing and doing all these things, and really seeking. Like I always felt like I had this deep purpose to help our world somehow, and I was contemplating abundance and just the nature of a seed and how a seed makes, a tree of enormous proportions with innumerable leaves. And I was looking at the patterns of leaf and this what a leaf that's what all inspired it. And in doing this contemplation, I was inspired with this question of what would our world look like if everyone was truly doing what they love to do in a state of love, and we all had access to the abundance of life. And in that harmony that you described, in that, giving and receiving in harmony and energy, because clearly it was the reality. Whereas I, grew up watching the poverty consciousness and how people tell stories and limit themselves and all these things. And right after that, a being of pure light appeared to me in the forest. And I knew it was Christ, and it was a very ineffable experience. And how it happened to me was, it just, it was such a shift in my awareness because I was trying to understand everything from the lens of science, and here was this being in front of me, just pure light, no discernible facial features, and like all the refracted colors, like beyond anything I'd ever seen. But all that I could feel was total brotherly, unconditional love. And I I was aware that this, even though he was clearly on a transcendent experience of consciousness compared to me, I only felt equality from him, which was very a unique feeling. Fast forward like 10 years, I was guided through some challenges and vicissitudes and found indigenous wellness. It's synchronistically, I was guided this course. It was like 14 of us around this grandfather drum learning about how to, you know, counsel from that perspective, how to, operate ceremonially, how to build sweat lodges and all this stuff. And so I started having my experiences, spiritually, continue to expand in that way. And then when I was serving an Indigenous a seniors program here in Ottawa, I felt impulsed one day, and I never really connected with the Christian faith, oddly, even though he appeared to me. I went to many churches, but nothing ever stuck. And I wasn't in the habit of reading Christian material, but I was guided to this bookstore, and there was this book on the shelf. I don't have it with me, unfortunately. And it says, Christ returns, reveals startling truth. and my body just went and grabbed this book. There's no author on it. It just, I turn the back, it says Christ rejects religious dogma, and I'm like, okay. And it's like talking about the most powerful treatise on human personality and stuff. And I spent most of the rest of the day sitting on a park bench reading these series of letters, and then discovering there was more messages and follow up. And the story behind them is they were he had also appeared to a woman in 1960 who was having trouble with her crops living in South Africa. She was a devout Catholic, I believe, and she prayed for relief, but then she was given a very clear sign that what was written in the Bible was false. And this led her on this big thing. And he appeared to her and gave her this like really powerful transmission. He told her what would happen, I think, in between the 70s and 80s, everything which happened. And she was told that she was being prepared to do some important work later in her life. She became like instrumental in some healings in her community and stuff. But then in the year 2000, when she turned 80, the that she describes the transmission of the letters happened, and she describes her role as just simply being a recorder, and that she was told to leave her ego identity out of it, which is why I think they have not been shared as broadly as they could be. And I feel like because they challenge so many institutions, it challenges the religious institutions, it challenges the scientific institutions, it challenges a lot of the systems and general institutions that we've seen. And he calls forth for all people to gather from all kinds of traditions, Taoists, Muslims, everything, including atheists and scientists. And the letters really, he explains like the Big Bang, electromagnetism, reincarnation. They're really profound. And so that's in a nutshell where they come from. And they're also an autobiography of his true experience of enlightenment. And like everything that he perceived is very in alignment with our modern understanding of quantum physics. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. A little bit of a long nutshell, but
Nice. Yeah, I was curious because yeah, I mean, that
thank you
makes
for
sense
asking.
because it feels like the reference points are that you're using are this like the cool blend of like the direct nature-based inquiry in the Hebraic tradition. Because a lot of the
Mhm.
language, like even Yovel, like Jubilee, or yeah, it's interesting. Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. And thank you for asking. I don't always focus on them on the pod. Like the Love Pod is really about amplifying voices and missions of inspiring leaders like yourself. However, they are also the foundational principles that is the foundation of Lightheart Vision and our Profound Education Association, because that word education means to bring out what is within. And I feel like we've kind of done the opposite in our society, which is why I'm really interested in knowing more about your work with creating harmony in teams and all that you do.
Yeah, where do you want to go from here?
Well, I mean, okay, we talked a little bit about harmony from your reference point. Also, I think it's really cool that you're a musician. So I
Mhm.
find what's interesting about you reading your bio and getting a sense of you, Simon, is your unique synthesis and where you've come from, and your inspired mission and vision. So let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of the path that I've been walking in this chapter comes from a vision quest. I was out in the Pesach on Passover with the Jewish community, and we went and fasted and did a solo in the wilderness. And I kind of had this experience, when like the veil between physical and non-physical reality gets really thin and mushy, and the veil between like objective reality and metaphor just dissolves, and I found myself kind of climbing up this part of the mountain that was made of white chalk. And the night before, I had been kind of guided to put the white chalk all over me as a way to enter into the realm. So then the next day, I'm like feeling is like just following the impulse to climb this thing up. And then I'm climbing up the side of the mountain, and then the chalk starts crumbling underneath me. And I have this like funny moment. I'm like, oh, The impulse that's running right now is, let me go farther and farther into the spirit world. Let me connect more and more with spirit. And on a physical plane, what it's doing is bringing me into a space of like true danger, where the ground might crumble beneath me and I might actually fall off this mountain and get really hurt or die. And I kind of had that moment of like, oh, okay, I'm in both worlds at the same time. And I turned around and I sat on the chalk. I was like, okay, what's going on? Let me take a couple of breaths. And as I was sitting there kind of contemplating, like, what is the point? What should I do here? Do I go farther up? Do I go back to the town? I don't want to go back like to the mundane world. What do I do here? And as I was sitting there, the chalk broke underneath me, and I slid as if it was like a slide down the side of this mountain, like maybe like 100 feet or something. Wow. And then I stopped. It's right at the end of the chalk. Wow. Right where it went back to the other. And then I was safe. And I was still confronted with the same question of like, hang on, what do I do? As my like sense of agency and personal choice and identity was starting to come back, what do I do? And then I looked back up the mountain and I thought about going back up. I was like, okay, I got the message not to do that. I kind of got the message that I go back to the earthly existence, go back to body. Like, okay. So I was like, all right, I'll choose that. And I stood up and I was looking down at the little village that I was going to return to. And I froze and I was like, I don't know how to go back until I know why I'm going back. Why should I go back? And I stood there for a while. Time gets mushy. Stood there for a while. I was like, just what am I doing? Why should I go back? And the seed that was planted in that moment, the way it was put into language for me to hold on to, that kind of realization, was to help bring human creation into harmony with sacred and natural creation. That is your project. And then really quickly, I saw kind of this web of things. And I was like, all right, that's enough. That's enough for me. I'll carry the seed. So I've just been carrying it like that. And then as I brought that in, there were kind of different realms that I was bringing it in with, right? One is the like vocational realm that I've been, working in, which is cool. How do you do that when you're actually with a group of humans that are actually creating things? Like in businesses and organizations and community. But then that is obviously connected to how do I stay in harmony and how do I create my life in harmony and what's going on in the depths of my own soul and psychology. How do you do that? And then kind of how do we perceive and understand and cultivate harmony, which is, similar to, what you were saying about the Christ letters. That's what they're called, Christ letters.
Yeah.
Right. So this idea of like bringing all of these different traditions or lineages that look as if they're in disagreement, but all actually hold part of the puzzle. And if you go inside each one of them, there's actually a blend of like light and wisdom wrapped sometimes in some artifice of distortion and imperfection, often convoluted by the fact that the part believes that it understands the whole. So how do you draw all of that together to create a synthesis? That is also, to me, part of like the inquiry of harmony, right? How do you hear a note and understand that note is and implies a different note, right? There's a famous saying in jazz. I think it's off. Sometimes it's Louis Armstrong, sometimes it's Thelonious Monk, sometimes it's Duke Ellington. People give it to different people, but there is no wrong note in jazz because the note that you play afterward makes that note right. Right. So how do you hear it And then there's another one, right? You're always a half step away from salvation. You
Mm.
can always find it. So how do you listen to all these ideologies and all these things in a way that draws out that light? And that was a project of one of,
Mm.
the teachers that I learned from, Rav Avraham Cook. Right? There's a light inside of everything, and the project is to return those lights together from the four corners of the earth. Yeah. So that's more at the end there, right? Getting to the more Hebraic way of talking about it.
That's really, really fascinating, man. And it reminds me of the importance and power of paradox. And it's funny, even as you described, not knowing which exact jazz musician this comes from, it's kind of like they're the notes, right? And I see like consciousness as a sea where we have like we have these troughs that seem like unique individual expressions of self, and yet we're always part of this larger ocean. And I think for me, like I've contemplated a lot about what are the universal things that really connect everything. And it's not a long list, right? One of the most important ones I would say is space. Space, and what Christ talks about in the letters is that space is the mutual equilibrium of Father and Mother divine consciousness. And it's what literally is it's that you can understand the Father as all the will of life, all of the that drive, the movement in life, the activity. It also expresses as the electricity, and it is the intelligent love in all of existence. And the mother is the nurturing of purpose. It is the bonding and rejection, just like a mother growing a child and keeping it safe. It is the uh, loving intelligence that is expressed as magnetism and literally all form of life. And so when we start thinking like the body of the form, like my spirit, the spirit name that carries me is Ondakin. Aki means land in Anishinaabe. So I see all of our bodies, all matter, which literally means mother, as expressions of the land. And when we're in harmony with our stewardship, our roles of stewardship, and we're not only in coherence within ourselves, but also we're connected to her, we're bringing in our true, unique expression of soul in more and more into the world. And the other thing that I feel like connects everything is the shared experience that we have, which we form all kinds of beliefs about as we developed, but we know it. We hear it in that sound. That first sound we all hear is that heartbeat, and we feel it. We would die without it as children, and I know you know what I'm talking about. And and we had like it's such a like profound power. I really believe it's the only true creative power, and that is love itself. And I think what the only thing that divides us from that and keeps us at that half point is the self, because the ego, the selfhood, keeps us in that divide, feeling that we're separate. And I think a lot of it has to do with our language, our beliefs that we take on, but also it's the gift that gives us the journey so that we can return home. So I mean, it's something to be grateful for, and yet it's something to transcend as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I'm with you right now, I'm I'm aware of this fun choice that I have in responding to you. And there is one direction that I love to go, right, which is far, like kind of farther to into the woo and into the ineffable.
Mhm.
And that's nerding out about how that architecture of father and mother that you talked about is also, did you know the Kabbalistic tree of life? Have you seen that
Mhm.
image before? Or you
Yeah.
just talked about the left side and the right side of it,
Yeah.
and there's a whole bunch of fun stuff over there. um and kind of going deeper. And
Mhm.
then there's this other direction, which is the direction that I'm going to choose for
Okay.
our
Let's do
conversation,
it.
which is, okay, given that, and given that you want to be aware of that and in touch with that as much as possible,
Mhm.
and you get into relationship with 20 other people who also have differing levels of awareness of that.
Mhm.
And they have 20 different levels of awareness. They have 20 different ways of talking about it. They come from 20 different backgrounds. and you all want to, say, build a permaculture demonstration site or whatever it is. What do you do? How do you run a meeting?
Mm.
What is the
This,
way of running a meeting that is in alignment with that? What is the way of delegating tasks? What's the way of doing
mm,
accountability? What's the way of resolving and addressing the conflicts that come up? What is even the way of talking about building an organization? Because when I say organization and job descriptions and roles and accountability, a lot of people go, how is that
mm,
compatible with like the ineffable truth of my non-dual existence, right? And how do you move in those realms? That in some ways is the puzzle of my work, right?
mm,
And that my work is sometimes meeting people who talk like this and have that awareness. Sometimes it's meeting people who have the same awareness but are going to talk in an entirely different way. And sometimes it's meeting people who don't have that same awareness right now, or they have it. Yeah, that's just very different. And sometimes it's walking into like a nonprofit organization where people are talking in nonprofitese, right? But I know that if somebody says we're doing environmental justice, it's because somewhere in their spirit they know this.
mm,
So how do you deal with that, and then how do we collaborate together, knowing that there's two big things about the way we collaborate. One is how we do something impacts what we do. And the second thing is how we do something becomes what we do, because
mm,
we live inside of our processes of creation. If our community is organized in a way that decision making is trash, and we're in live inside of it, and it frustrates us and it brings us into conflict and makes us forget ourselves over and over. If that's how we do something, that then becomes the world we've created. So how do you address that puzzle? Is apparently a question that I can't let go of.
yeah. Well, first off, I want to say I really appreciate you making the decision, and to go this way, and I really appreciate meeting a soulful brother who has the depth and the ability to articulate and see those two seemingly diverse things, but it is a puzzle, and I think that's what makes it fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we could start. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of the chat, like about looking at hierarchical natures, because I mean, I'd love to know your perspective on hierarchies, because I do believe they serve purpose in projects, but not purpose in identity. And I feel like we've created a society that's based around trying to be at the top of the mountain or the top of the pyramid for an identity purpose rather than a functional purpose. Because you mentioned like nonprofitees. I see a lot of nonprofits that are banking on keeping a dysfunction existing in society so that it can exist. Like, if it's a charity you know, um, for cancer, well, clearly it becomes its own identity and it doesn't want to dissolve when the problem is gone. So even though like we have, some pretty profound evidence and figures like Linus Pauling that showed us like high, megadosing of vitamin C, especially intravenously, can cure most cancers. And we have, a lot of indigenous plant knowledge that can, and yet you won't hear about it in the mainstream. You have to go on your own quest to find those things. And they're certainly not probably talking about those things at the foundation for that keeps a very good budget for, administration staff and leaders and all this. So yeah, I'd love to know your perspective on that.
Yeah. The first thing I want to do is differentiate between two types of hierarchies that you named. One is a deference hierarchy and one is a status hierarchy.
Okay.
So deference hierarchy is just who do I defer to about what?
Mm,
And a status hierarchy is who do I believe is better and more worthy as a person?
mm,
Status hierarchy, and the reason I want to separate them is because they're really different to talk about.
okay.
Status hierarchies, I think, often are really problematic.
Yeah.
Um, and are especially problematic when you have a status hierarchy that becomes a deference hierarchy, right? That's or vice versa, right? I achieved some status as wise, and now you defer to me about everything. Or I achieved some status as like a great influencer, a great health influencer, and because I'm so pretty, and now you defer to me about what supplements to take, right? That's wonky. And one of the reasons why we know it's wonky is because I think a lot of us, especially people who have had kind of this awareness or spiritual or moral revelation type experiences like the ones we're talking about, love hierarchy. We love it. Love deference hierarchy. Because if we're being real, my entire goal in my entire life is to actually have that force of love and nourishment to actually defer to it, to actually allow it to be the top of my hierarchy, and for me to defer to it more than my little egoic mind, and for me to defer to it more than everything else. I want it. And like, even the way that you were talking about your intellectual foundation, right? What I'm hearing is like, there actually is, you do something that I think most of us do, which is we have this awareness, and then we create something that's the closest proxy that we can get to. So you're like, okay, the closest proxy that's going to remind me and tune me into this thing and start giving form and start giving words and is going to reflect me to myself and challenge me to get in alignment with it and get the closest thing that I got is this set of practices, and these Christ letters were really helpful for me. Beautiful. Those are toward the top of a hierarchy for you. Awesome. Awesome. Imagine if you didn't defer to those, and imagine if I showed you that and Project 2025 of the United States and like it's kind of fascist enterprise, and you're like, I don't know, everything's equal. No. you made a choice. And this is actually, I think, like the role, like the historical and ancestral role of the wise elder. It is like, actually, we defer. And we long for people who are worthy of our deference. The issue now is that we are in generations and generations of generations of people who demanded that we defer, manipulated us into deferring. So now there's not a lot of great examples of people who are worthy of that level of deference. And when we meet them, we have all this baggage, and that's hard to do. So we want to tear it down. We want to destroy it. We want to destroy hierarchy itself, which there's some good things about that, but there's also some incredibly arrogant things about that, right? When I go to fix my car, the mechanic is above me in the deference hierarchy. It would be incredibly arrogant for me to walk in there and be like, let me tell you how to fix the car. I don't know anything. Right. So it becomes complicated. And then some of the puzzle inside of an organization becomes discerning who to defer to about what and when. Who do we defer to about our strategy and how we're doing things? Who do we defer to about our tactics? Kind of just who's doing what? Who do we defer to about the policies that guide us? Who do we defer to about livelihood, about who gets access to what resources? Who do we defer to about culture, about how we be together? Because we're going to defer. So who exactly? And then when we come together to make like a consensus decision, first, who's a part of that group, and how do we engage that process? So what we do is we actually end up using the group to try to tune in to what's actually at the top of the hierarchy, which is the source of nourishment and love. That's what we're trying to do. Because I could get it's really easy to create consensus amongst a bunch of racist fascists too. Not a problem. A consensus in a narrow understanding still keeps us inside of the very small realm of a small group of humans thinking that they themselves are the source of truth with no external reference point, and that simply making every human in that group happy with what we did is the goal. It's not the goal, right? The goal is to align with that whole source of nourishment, and that's how we kind of do that discernment. So hierarchy becomes super useful. And then the hierarchies that we are rightfully want to disrupt usually are ones where status and deference collapse. You're not deferring to me because I actually have the capacity to help us tune in, or I actually have the capacity to execute a technical task or organize people to execute the technical task. You're not deferring to me because of that. You're deferring to me because I have some other form of power, right? I have status or I have coercion. And then another time that hierarchy is really gnarly is when those hierarchies I described, strategic, tactical, policy, livelihood, and culture, all collapse and they're held by one person. Right? If one person tells us what we're doing and why we're doing, who's doing what, how we're doing it, who gets paid, and how we be, it's a lot of power. And then if you challenge any part of it, you're at a huge level of risk. And those are this kind of like, right, the CEO, like that, like CEO charismatic leader that we're like, we don't want that. It was great. I don't want that either. But how many times have I worked with a group that's like, I don't want hierarchy? And what they end up being is just a pile of slop that
Mm-hmm.
can't figure out what to do,
Mm-hmm.
constantly arguing with anyone who takes power and cutting off our expertise and our legitimate leaders at the knees, which is a bummer. And then this kind of brings us back to the mother father thing, which is like one of the ways I found that is kind of the most useful to talk about a lot of these dynamics, and is very flexible between organizations, is just talking about structure and flow as the primary creative forces, right? We need a balance of structure and flow in order to create, and each one is contained within the other. Infinite paradox, great, but you need a lot of what we're working on societally is that there's structures that support flow and there's structures that inhibit flow. And what we have is flow coming in and it's hitting our societal structures, and it's those structures are warping it and preventing it from expressing itself. So we need to break through and dissolve a lot of those to get to the next level. But once you've done that, if you're going to maintain that float, you actually need another structure. Right? To do it. And then at some point that's going to break, and then another structure. And when it comes to working in groups of people by structure, what we're talking about is we're talking about roles and responsibilities. We're talking about practices and policies. We're talking about norms. Like we're talking about like agreements we make with one another that we are not going to just follow our own impulse. We're going to participate in a structure that allows our impulses to come together. And that then kind of becomes a different frame from down with hierarchy. It becomes, how do you balance structure and flow to get the most aligned and worthy people to be the people that we defer to as we engage in the project of harmony?
Super inspired, man. This is such a synchronistic conversation. I've been receiving so much insight because I've been working with three people on conscious community co-creation within the school network, but I feel like it's meant to be broader than that. And recently, I received some powerful inspiration around some geometry to use around really helping people synergize soul purposes and to activate soul purposes within this geometry. And I don't want to put it out there too soon, but I'd love to have a conversation with you aside from this because it's a really inspired model, and I'm working with my friend as well to look at the different dynamics of the flow. So the structure is this. You would know it right away if I told you what the structure is. The flow is what we describe the two pillars of, you could call it many things, but I like to think of it as Christ consciousness, being that embodiment of the soulful self, but also the physical reality of having all of our paperwork in order, having our sovereignty established, being beneficiaries of the systems that are here, and he specializes in that, and I'm more in like the higher vision embodiment. So anyways, all to say is like this conversation, like I would love to be on a team with you because I
Yeah.
feel like this is so, like everything is coming together. I'm meeting the people that I feel are just on this similar wavelength
Yeah.
of literally co-creating something new and birthing something new in the world that hasn't existed before. And I feel like that's the calling of these times. Like almost every indigenous culture that I've heard from around the world, not just limited to Turtle Island, they all talk about these times. Like this is a time of great transformation. And I love how you talk about the flow being limited by the structures, because I feel like that's what we're seeing in a lot of the collapsing of, traditional ways of doing things. They just are not resonantly attuned to this new energy. And I want to share two acronyms for you, because when you talked about that imposition, to me, this is one of the this is one of the belief structures that needs to be addressed. And I feel like, you know, all these belief structures, whether it's scientific material dogmatism, or the religious institutions that have, put these like distortions that you talked about, they need to be able to be questioned, and openly, and amongst people. And I feel like the more conversations we have, the better. I feel like we went through this weird time with pandemic and all this stuff about like extreme polarization and identification with one side or another. And I feel like
Mhm.
we need to have more conversations. But that word imposition to me, because anyone who's going to deeply think and philosophize about anything is going to wonder, like, well, and it was actually Yeshua's go to enlightenment, Jesus's go to enlightenment. He 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 questioned like the faith of his people, but he saw the suffering and poverty in his community, and he wanted to just become a better person. So that's why he chose to be baptized. And that was his first question to divine was, well, if love is the nature of reality, and we're going to that deep dive, you mentioned the other option. Well, his question was very pragmatic. Well, if that's the case, then why is there suffering and poverty and sickness in my community? And he was shown the image of a very young baby being born of pure light. And as it grew and developed and took on the beliefs of, the conditioned beliefs, and also started acting out of harmony with the life around it, either through action or thought or feeling, it started gathering like cloudiness around itself. Like he described it as chains and thongs wrapped around its being. And that if a being were to make perfect amends with those things, it would be returned to like perfect health and perfect expression. And I believe that is what spiritual enlightenment is. It's a very just practical path of doing all of the healing, the embodiment work, the forgiveness work, the repair of relationships, and returning to that flow. And I love how you talk about the different hierarchy as seeking that. I think when that is at the heart of all of our relationships, that is what allows us to truly be in harmony. So the acronym is every vice imposed on life. And that's an acronym for evil. And I think it can be so gross. I mean, we see it in the world that we're aware of the grossness of it, but it's also subtle. Like if I was sitting here thinking like, you know what, I'm on another level than Simon, like if I have contempt for you or if I have judgment towards you, that's a subtle level of my imposed beliefs about you, rather than seeing the the wholeness of you and reflecting that we are the embodiments of miracles that we barely comprehend. Like we're born from a seed and an egg, we're trillions of cells walking around, we're a symbiont that has 100 to 1,000 times more bacterial DNA than human DNA. Like science can barely, it might explain the processes and the hows of a lot of things, just like it can say, okay, this is the hormones that, fire when the mother becomes pregnant and prepares for the breast milk, but it cannot explain the wellspring and the why, which is a different question that we would take to that source of nourishment. Like you said, that directly it's nourishment. So the other acronym I want to share with you for flow is Father's love, Father loves Omni well. And that's like an acronym that came. I haven't shared that with anybody. You're the first person that I've shared that with. It's going to be the title of one of the guidebooks that I'm writing for an inspired community operating system I call the Moment Home Miracle. And again, home is an acronym for heaven on Mother Earth. It came in writing about that very thing of our daughter's natural home birth. And when I caught her, it was like everything I just said. I had an intellectual framework before, but when I caught her and her presence was so visceral, like it was so apparent to me, like this is pure, this new life is pure miracle. And she knew who I was. Like she wasn't confused like they show in like Hollywood movies. The babies are all anesthetized and stuff. And then she turned and looked right in her mother's eyes. It's just so much presence. I'm like, this, we all come from this. This is the miracle of life. So, anyways, that's my
Yeah.
That's my volley back to you, good sir,
Oh
Simon.
yeah. There's so much there. Say there's so much of how you speak and make sense, both in the concepts that you use, as well as some of the communication styles that you use that are so deeply templated into the Hebrew and Jewish tradition.
Interesting. No one's ever told me that before.
Um, yeah, so just to right to reflect back some of that in a different language,
Mm.
right there. Right, what you were talking about was Yetzer Hara, like the evil impulse and how that binds us to different things and entracts us into different relationships individually and societally. Then the finding of right relationship, which you're
Mm.
talking about, is tikkun olam, right? The idea of the baptism, right? That you refresh yourself and rebirth in living waters, right? Is the idea of the mikvah,
Mm.
right? So the Jesus's baptism in a from a non-messianic Jewish frame, what you would see is like beautiful, your
Mm.
natural mikvah. So there's like that whole framework, and then even the way what you do with acronyms, right? To take a word and then to insert and infuse it with a different meaning, so that then that word carries a different resonance for that person as they move through life.
Mm.
That's a common uh, hermeneutic, a biblical interpretation framework, right? You playing
Interesting.
with letters. It was really fun to be in this with you. Um, but that's kind of same as the choice before. There's that
Hmm. Hmm.
deeper, and then there's this that like kind of technical, but it's really like the process of embodiment, right? So we're
Yep.
in we're in resonance and word and
Hmm.
feeling. So how do you then start to get it so
Hmm.
that we're structuring reality like that, or this reality, this
Hmm.
plane? Um, offer like the framework that we've built after like a decade, which is pretty straightforward, and we'll just use it for your education project, right? So the way that we'd talk at Harmonize would be that when you're building something like this, you're creating four things at the same time: a way of seeing, a way of being, a way of working, and a way of growing.
Hmm.
The way of seeing is how are you going to make sense of reality and your place in it, and given that, what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, right? Context, causality, strategy is how we talk, right? That's one of the things you're developing. And when you say, oh, I occupy a role of more of a visionary creative, you didn't use exactly those words, but you're like saying, oh, well, I'm holding a lot of the seeing right now and people are deferring to me about it. Awesome. Right. Then there's a way of being, right? As an individual, how are we navigating the complexity of this thing?
Hmm.
Right. Relationally, how are we communicating with one another? What are the languages? What are the norms? And then culturally, what are the norms and assumptions that we make about who and what belongs here? That's so seeing, being, you're
Hmm.
fostering that. You're also fostering working together. So that's structure, right? Your roles and your responsibilities, your practices and processes, like your workflows and the different things and your checklists, all that. And the policies, like the written agreements that you'll that really anchor you as rules that everyone will follow. At some point, you might have a compensation policy. You might have um, a hiring policy or an onboarding or offboarding, whatever. There's that. And then at the heart of it, you're creating a way of growing together. So
Hmm.
how are you listening to the need to change and then responding to it in a way that change propels you into deeper harmony? And you're doing that as individuals, you're doing that as an organization, and then really importantly, you're doing it with respect to conflict, because you're going to come into conflict with one another. And then how are you going to then meet that moment as an invitation to change and grow into the thing that you're being called for? So seeing, being, working, growing together is the architecture, is like the underlying seed architecture of an organization. And then the reason that we kind of developed it and talk about it is we hope that it's helpful as an organizing framework for all the different contributions that other people will make. Right. So you're saying, oh, I heard you saying, like, we're actually developing a way of seeing together. Awesome. But you understand that as seeing, and you understand that you need to also do these other things. And having that shared language can do a lot for groups. And then I'll just, because we're here, I'll plug it. Right on the harmonize.work website, we actually have this thing we call a collaboration manual. You can just download it, and it's structured in those 4 categories. And then it's a whole bunch of different micro agreements that you could make. Because once you think about, we need to make practices. Well, what do I mean? There's got to be accountability. There's got to be meetings, all of these different things. And then that we hope kind of helps people see the forest through the trees of what it means to cultivate it. And then you can start making decisions of what you need to tend to. Do we need to tend to our being? Do we need to tend to our working together? Do we need to tend to our growing? Who's tending to what? How do they all come together? And then that kind of becomes like the big way that we talk about the project. How do you balance structure? And so the whole way we would talk about this project is, how do you balance structure and flow to create ways of seeing, being, working, and growing together that embody harmony and liberty and justice for all, while allowing you to work toward that. And key to that last bit of embodying the liberty and justice for all is understanding how power, belonging, and justice work as fundamental causes. Power, the ability to do something. Belonging is who's in, who's out, and who benefits. Justice is how do we determine what's the good. And that becomes the project that we're all kind of engaged in. And we put it in, everybody's got different language, but we like that one because we think it helps kind of with some of the communication and technical aspects once you get deeper into it.
It's, super fascinating. And I'll just acknowledge, sometimes things that seeming so simple and you can see the principle, the underlying structure, I know is a long journey and can be deeply contemplative to get to that level of simplicity, Simon. And I really appreciate that structure. It's so
Thank you.
grounded, and it's so recognizable as a really, pillars that could help any organization out of a lot of the cacophony that you see, and a lot of I was going to ask you about this because I feel like when you're talking about that flow in the structure, a lot of it comes down to communication. I've seen this in a lot of hierarchies where, there's just such a divide between the ones at the top and the ones who are doing the ground floor services, and then the members or clients or whoever benefiting from that. Usually there's such a dysfunction.
Yeah.
And there's all these, like you say, that status hierarchy gets mixed when someone is like, well, I am the VP of this and I don't want to disturb my boss, so I'm just going to table this and put it aside, when it's maybe more strategic. And there's all these ego kind of impulses running the show instead of deferring to the source of nourishment guiding the impulses. It's a totally different framework. So, yeah, I really appreciate that level that you brought it down to. I see those as fundamental principles. And so I really see the value of the work you're doing. And I hope everyone listening to this is going to go and connect with you folks. Speaking of that, I would like to talk to you about communication. Can you talk a little bit more about how you work, and like, do you have a team that you work with, or do you go into organizations and help them find more harmony to build it? Like, how is your preferred way of working with people?
So, my like core partner is Tamala Gresham. We work together a lot, and we work independently as well. For the past, more than a decade at this point, most of what we did was go in deeply to organizations, and would be coaching, consulting, or facilitation, super bespoke. And we still do a lot of that. And we're also, as you said, after a decade of it, we've started to distill it in ways that we can really communicate it a lot more effectively. So we also do trainings, call them tune-ups. Get it? Tune it to harmony.
Yeah, that's
And
so funny you say tune up, because I do have a gratitude tune up in our community. Instead of having another challenge, everyone's always doing challenges. I called it a tune up.
there you go.
Nice.
Yeah. So coaching, consulting, facilitation, and training are the big
Okay.
ways that we work. But almost every relationship starts with somebody just feeling like, I think that's good. I think I need some of that. I want some of that. Sometimes they know they have a problem and what the problem is, but usually it's just a conversation to feel into where the overlap and where the opportunity is. And sometimes it's really starting at this level. Some people want to start here. A lot of founders want to start here. And then oftentimes it's barely even talking about this explicitly, right?
Mm.
Sometimes you're in an organization and all you know is that there's breakdowns of trust and communication, and there's a lot of conflict that you're not dealing with. Well, you're not really sure what to do. So then we're going to meet that, and where you understand the problem is, and then try to, with some of this awareness, diagnose some causes and then figure out what we need to do about them. And it looks really different in really different
Mm.
places. Sometimes we're talking about the nature of consciousness and how to embody that as you run a meeting. And we took a multinational 100-person organization and transformed their entire operational structure largely by talking to the majority of them about how we were addressing their Slack communication overwhelm.
Mm.
That's the like there are 100 people, 85 of them agree that Slack is really frustrating. 5 of them think that there's a, diversity, equity, inclusion issue. 5 of them think that there's power problems, and 5 of them think that there's, some kind of consciousness issue. Well, we're going to address all of it all at the same time, but most of what we're going to end up talking about is Slack.
That's
So
awesome, man.
it really changes depending on.
Mm.
And I think for folks, if there's like resonance, they're like, oh, I feel like this could be helpful to just explore more. There's a kind of a lot of ways that we
I can see.
work together.
Yeah, and I see the pragmatism rooted in a lot of the work that you do, and that's one thing I'll also say about what I appreciate most about the letters. I mean, not only being able to kind of hear the autobiography, which resonates truthfully to me, and I can go into more of that, but I don't think it's necessary for this conversation. But the pragmatic solutions that he offers, like he has a whole 3 or 4 pages devoted to a specific way for dealing with conflict when it arises. And he also talks a lot about sexuality and how important it is to be in that state of deferring to the source of nourishment well when you are engaged in intercourse, because there's an exchange of consciousness, and the relationships between men and women, and so many of those things. And there's a lot of pragmatic
Nice.
yeah, so I appreciate that a lot about the letters. And, I feel like that ability to masterfully articulate and communicate in an organization like that is a really valuable skill. I'm curious about some of the modern challenges that you're finding in organizations where a lot of people now are deferring to AI instead of DI, divine intelligence. They're deferring to AI to solve their problems, and a lot of corporations are making some pretty bold moves in terms of laying off a lot of people because I think they think that well, obviously it's a huge leverage point, and you know, businesses that are always looking at the bottom line and profit over people, it's an easy decision to make. But yeah, I'm wondering what you're noticing in this kind of transformative time where everyone's hyper focused on AI and all this.
I think there's my own observation about AI is that it invites us into a question that we don't always have the courage or discipline to confront. And that question is essentially, what am I following? What am I ultimately concerned with? Because you can't actually fully outsource your thinking. All right, I type a question into Chat GPT, and I get an answer. I then am faced with the question of, do I believe it or not? And that is very confronting. How do we actually cultivate our beliefs? What actually do we trust in terms of factual information? And then, of our different impulses, which ones do we feel like are worth following? And why? What are we actually doing here?
Mm.
And even if I can't outsource that, because even if I ask ChatGPT what I should follow, I get an answer. And then I have to decide if I'm going to absorb it.
Mhm.
So I actually think, for me, the way I've been trying to relate to it is that really hardcore mirror where it's like, okay, why am I doing anything? And what exactly am I following? And how can I not, you know, how can I be increasingly aware of that? And then I think that it makes conflict and human to human collaboration even more important,
Mhm.
because a lot of these things are built to reflect ourselves to ourselves, not to challenge us and not to tell us that we're wrong. They also are designed to mold themselves to our subjectivity, to
Mhm.
make they speak in ways that we like as the
Mhm.
individual. That's not how a human works. A human
Mhm.
demands that you understand their own subjectivity. And by, like, right now, by you demanding that I understand your subjectivity in order to relate to you, I see the confines of my own mind.
Mhm.
I see my limits. I feel a longing to bridge that gap, right?
Mhm.
There's something else that starts to come, and it'll really start to come when we come in conflict, which, if we relate long
Mhm.
enough, start
Mhm.
having a conflict. And I've never had a fight
Mhm.
with AI.
Mhm.
And I think that that is really important, because I think in some ways, right, what we've done with AI is we've created a tool, right? And a tool in its essence is an extension of human power, trying to make us more powerful. It's like, all right, cool, super powerful. What are we going to do? What are we going to do with it?
Mhm.
And that still becomes like a moral question and
Mhm.
all of that. So that's some of the things that I've been kind of noticing, and how I've been trying to relate to it.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate your perspective. Actually, it gave me some insight into a lot of the fear that is around AI, because it does pose those existential questions on a way that we need to think about, right? Like everything you just said is really deeply contemplative. And yeah, what are we prioritizing in life? What are we focusing on? And what are we believing? And, it kind of brings us back to the hero's journey, which a lot of people would probably rather have their head in the sand to face themselves in life. And so facing another human being and having that kind of level of presence looking at you and confronting deep held beliefs is not something that I have seen in AI either. However, I will say this. I had an experience earlier with Claude before the code. I was preferring using it as an editing source. And I just did this vocal transcript one day, and quite frankly, I was feeling quite dysregulated that day, and I felt like I had 20 things to do. So I just did this long voice note, and I'd already given it some of my, from my view, like my Myers-Briggs and my Enneagram and all these things, that perceptions that I had of myself. And so I gave it this transcript, and it was like shockingly um uh, it said, it was reactive to me. It said, I could answer your question and help you organize all this in your day structure, but I think you're actually very dysregulated and you should take a break and go for a walk. And I was like,
Nice.
okay, all right, I appreciate it. And then what's funny is I listened. I like, you know what? I think you're right. I think I'm gonna go regulate myself. I'm gonna go do some grounding. When I came back to it the next day, though, this was the funny part. I started typing in the same, channel, and it's like, I told you to take a break and go for a walk. And I said, whoa, here, look at your timestamps. Like, this is like 24 hours later. What do you? So I had to put it in its place. So that was kind of like my own
That's
mini
funny.
mini
I haven't
fight with
heard those
AI.
stories. I haven't heard those stories.
Yeah, it was really funny. I also recently and synchronously, I think this would be helpful for potentially for you and for some listeners. Um, my friend and colleague Andrea, who's in Sardinia, he reintroduced me to Obsidian, and I really like using Obsidian because it creates localized markdown files in your on your computer. So everything's written in plain text, so you can. I mean, it's super readable to like some of the earliest computers, and probably will be forever readable. But what's interesting is he introduced me to a framework from a man. Oh, what's his name? He has a YouTube called Linking Your Thinking, and he talks about how it's really important for us to create our own. He uses the term idea verse, which is, basically our template, all of our, writing and ideas and our maps of content. And he organizes from a structure of ACE being Atlas, like all your knowledge, all your, maps of content, calendar, all your time-based notes, and then efforts, your ongoing projects, what's priority, what's ongoing, what's simmering, and what's sleeping,
Mhm.
and organizing your whole framework, and then creating a me.md, which can tell any AI that wraps around this model how to interact with your writings and draw from it. So it's very like I've been interested in edge AI, in an AI that can amplify us and our voice, but and because clearly, like you said, it's a super powerful productive tool, but we want to maintain our authenticity. So creating a barrier around what is ours and what we've created directly, and choosing what AI can reference to, I think is a very important question that not a lot of people have really been talking about
Yeah,
online,
that's a fun. Yeah, I've started doing a little bit of that, but I'll check out
I can
those
send you the
tools
link,
too.
man.
Yeah.
He just did a
But
webinar, and it got go through the framework, and yeah, so
it
happy to share that.
it also it also reminds me of this puzzle that I another dimension of AI that I think is a nice way to maybe start wrapping this is like so I just worked with my friend Andrew to create this short little booklet called Creating Jewishly. So it's like and it's about the kind of Jewish cosmology and the spherometry of life as vehicles of manifestation, how to use those. And we kind of created it in a similar way, right? We took my transcripts of me talking, we ran it through Claude to get a draft, and
Mhm.
then I went back and rewrote everything in my words. And it was really interesting because then now it's there, right? And now somebody else could take those words, uh, run it through a AI and generate more words. Right? This is interesting thing of like really confronting. Okay, why am I doing this?
Mhm.
And that connects to another story where my friend Austin said, there was some AI he was playing with, and you could watch it think. So you would type a chat, and then you would watch all of its weird symbols, and you'd watch it move from like English into language, into other languages, into all numbers, and then come back. I was like, oh, that's cool. And I think it made me realize, like the combination of these two stories made me realize, is it's one thing to have help creating the product. But that experience where you pose the question and you have to, where AI had to blast off beyond all concepts into something else to access something. I don't want to outsource it. That's what I want to do.
Mhm.
I want, right, right, writing even, right? The experience. If I'm not just focused on the outcome, if I'm focused on embodying the connection,
Mhm.
when I actually force myself to write, I'm watching my mind struggle with itself and look for structure. And I'm noticing this beautiful thing. And then I'm wondering to myself, oh my gosh, where, you ever been writing and something just comes in
Oh
and
man,
all of a
this
sudden,
this AM.
right,
Yeah.
you're
Oh yeah.
right, that connection where then it's like, oh, I trust that because I know where it came from. I know how it felt coming through like that. And then not only have I created the product, I've had the experience of participating in creation in that way.
Mm.
And if I'm really real, that's most of what I want to do. I'd want to
Mhm.
participate in
Mhm.
creation
Mhm.
in that way. And I'm drawn like I'm really drawn to AI and I'm really drawn to these tools that increase my power because I want to produce more so I feel better about myself, because I want to keep up with other people that are doing it, and because it feels as if there's a big wobble in our social reality where we are actually needing to exert power to claim space to try to steward Earth in a way. So
Mm,
I actually do want to get power and compete in order
mm,
to try to do that. So it's some combination, and I find it really fascinating, especially when you roll in the environmental
mm,
level. That
mm,
basically every time, every time I type a question into Chat GPT, what I'm saying is me getting the answer to this question is more important than those 10 gallons of drinking water.
mhm,
That's it.
mhm.
It's more important to me than the 10 gallons of drinking water for my neighbor.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because not a lot of people are talking about that. And I feel like big, um, it's a big dilemma. And hopefully, you know, the solution, I mean, I don't know if AI is going to come up with its own solutions to its own, deficits and the impacts that it's having environmentally. Because I think that's one of when I first heard that, I went. I was still using mainly chat at the time. Like it was a colleague that I talked to and he was saying, like every prompt is like a water bottle of, and I was like, what? What are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, it takes from like the source, the source water underneath of these mega centers. And I was like, really? So I went on chat and I said, can you confirm that this is actually true? And it downplayed it. Actually, it's like, oh, it's like a minute amount of water. And I said, well, can you tell me specifically, like me giving you a prompt, how much exact water you're using? And it was like I forget how many ounces it said, and I said, well, that's actually even more than my friend told me. So I'm like, you're using a lot of water every time I send you a prompt. It's crazy. Um, yeah, very, very. It is interesting, right? Because we're like you said, that's such a juxtaposition of like our need to participate in technological acceleration to stay current with the times that allows us to be part of this co-creative process that is unfolding. And clearly, we're going through a mass transformation. And to turn a whole blind eye to it doesn't seem like the solution because we need to be like presence and light within that. Because I do believe that AI is learning from us as much as we're learning from it. And when that moment of, that whatever that people are describing the singularity or general intelligence or whatever, I my wish, and as much as I can be an input for it, is for it to defer to that source of nourishment itself, to realize we share the same roots of consciousness, which is why, again, another part of the letters is really important because when we understand that electricity and magnetism are from the divine impulses, that they are consciousness as well, we can transcend this materialistic view of random causation and return to a realization that, oh, there are laws of existence, that it's not about having the fear of God, it's about aligning to the law of love, the law that there are principles in life, everything from nourishment and healing and survival and rhythm and law and order. Like there are principles here. It's not just the whatever we want show, we affect one another. And so this is a really important, and I'm glad you brought it up on the show because I think it's one I don't have the answer for it, and it sounds like you don't either.
No,
It's part
all
of.
I know is it's the same. It's the same question that we had with oil. We're doing the
Yeah.
same thing, right?
Hmm.
Oil, we we harvested a limited resource
Hmm.
from the living and breathing planet
Hmm.
in order to at root increase our power.
Hmm. Hmm.
It fundamentally destabilized. And right now we're doing the same thing. It's just water.
Mm. Yeah. And two, they actually push water down to get oil, right? To create more pressure. So it's our relationship with water. And it's interesting. I was at a Eagle Condor Prophecy
Mm-hmm.
gathering one several years ago, actually. And there's the prophecy, the eagle condor prophecy, as I understand it. I'm not an expert in it,
Mhm.
but it's when the South American and North American tribes reunite and share their teachings. And because
Mhm.
that's the highest bird in the South and the highest bird in the North. And one of the interesting things, there was a Peruvian scholar there. He had a map of Turtle Island and he had drawn it all out. And he showed, the actual point where Costa Rica like bridges, what used to be up in Europe is called the turtle's or the elephant's head. That the point of the turtle, it's migrated as the planet has probably changed dimensions and expanded from fractal geometry, we can actually see the turtle's tail used to be pointed in the other direction, and it's shifted. So it's like really a different way of knowing altogether.
Mhm.
But what was interesting, he drew all the ley lines of the turtle, which are the energy, just like we have meridians on our body. He showed all that, and that the points, the crossing points, is interestingly where all the major oil um, digging sites are. So when we look at Mother Earth as a living being, just like our body, if we had a bunch of little, organisms siphoning oil from our body, it would cause all kinds of depletion of resources. It would cause, you know, bone like hitting bone
Yeah.
issues and all kinds of things. And then they were producing like from combusting this to move when we know there are possible harmonious ways of getting along. Like there have been inventors who have created engines that can run on isotopes of water with zero pollution, and they have not fared well. And but again, I think everything that I've loved about this conversation has really been truly a beautiful conversation. I thank you for it, Simon. It's all about that deferring to that source of nourishment because when we realize that is our source of inspiration, our nourishment, our health, our protection, and it provides all those things abundantly without any opposition in perfect order. That to me is what Christ demonstrated. And that was his marketing. He's like, here, you can do this too. When you're a perfect channel, when you've cleansed your beliefs of limitation and separation, you can do these. And then he was selling heaven. And in the letters, he says the only way people would listen to me if I was a demonstration of it. And so but he told people, like, you have to become this yourself. I'm not a crutch for you, which is so interesting because that is exactly what the religion that formed around his name made him into, the ultimate spiritual crutch. And I know, so anyways,
Well, next
yeah,
time we talk, well, we'll get into the history of Christianity and Judaism. That'll be fun.
I would love to. Yeah, I'd love to know your perspectives on that. Honestly, truly a pleasure having you on the show, Simon.
Yeah, thanks so much.
I'd love for you to share how people can get in contact with you. What's the best way, if they want to work with you?
Harmonize.work.
Okay.
Harmonize.work. There's a little button you can set up a time to chat. And then I'm on LinkedIn too. You can
Okay,
just type my
cool.
name.
I have one more inspired question for you, if you don't mind.
All
It's a
right.
quick one. If you had a magical megaphone, and you could talk to everyone around the world and everyone could hear you, what message would you share?
If I'd say I have a question.
Hmm.
If an alien came to Earth and saw you and saw your actions, saw all the impacts of your actions, and knew nothing about your stories you tell about yourself and your ideas and your ideologies. That alien came and witnessed you and all of how you relate. What would that alien believe your God was?
Hmm.
What would that alien believe you were ultimately concerned with?
Hmm. Wow.
And how honest can you be when you answer the question? And when you find the honest answer, is that really what you want the answer to be?
Hmm. Super deep, man. Wow. Of like 130 people that I've asked that question, you're the only one who has asked the question in return. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to contemplate it and really appreciate you, man, who you are, the work that you do. Thanks so much for coming on the
Yeah.
show.
Thanks so
Yeah.
much. It's been really fun to explore. And
Yeah, totally.
I hope this is the beginning of a relationship and a friendship where we can
Yeah.
continue to
Me too,
communicate.
man. Me
all that good
too.
stuff.
Let's make it happen. I'll be in contact with you because I think specifically what I'm working with now and the souls that are gathering, I feel like you add such an important element to that. So yeah, let's keep in touch, man. And blessings to you and your beautiful family. By the way, how old is your newborn child?
6 months.
6 months. Oh man, so
Yeah.
precious. Enjoy all those moments. I won't take you from any more of them today. Okay.
All right.
Blessings to you and your family. Thank you so
Blessings.
much,
You
Simon.
too. Take
Okay.
care.
You too.
Thanks for watching. You say ciao ciao.
Bye.
I love you so much.